Hi guys, welcome to another Monday night study. Since we're having our upcoming Branson conference this week, I decided to just give you a kind of a sneak peek on some of the topics going on and just kind of let you know what it is, why we're connected with it, and then some things we've been working on this week and where we're going for the rest of the month, and hopefully get started on some very interesting projects to share with you guys in 2025. So it'll be fun. Let's first go to that. So we have, this is just from Prophecy Watchers. Prophecy Watchers, if you're not familiar with it, is a ministry dedicated to spreading the gospel and specifically the end time prophecy. They're a pre-tribulational, premillennial group, and so that's why I like hanging out with them. A lot of people. So this is one where finally, the last time they were in Branson, if I remember correctly, was the first time I ever did anything with them, and that was 2012. So quite a long time ago. But anyway, so this one's called the Christmas in Branson. One is going to be at the Chateau of the Lake, at the Lake of the Ozarks. And let's see here. So it's December 5th to the 8th, 2024. Conference speakers will be Gary Stearman, Mondo Gonzalez, Jonathan Kahn, Billy Crone, Alex Newman, Don Perkins. I know these guys, they're really fantastic. Brandon Holhouse, Bill Salas, L.A. Marzulli, J.B. Hickston, Lieutenant Colonel Bob McGinnis, Bill Coing, Lee Brainerd, Matt Freeman, Patrick Wood, Ken Mickle, rather, Ken Johnson, so the two Kens are put together, Larry Olison, Michael Carey, Terry James, Derek Gilbert, and then Josh Peck and Donna Howe. So, and then they're going to have some special music by Ben and Allison Calhoun. The conference schedule is down here if you're interested in it. So it's going to start December 5th in the main auditorium. That would be Thursday. Check-in is 2 to 6. So it's going to start basically at 6 o'clock on Thursday night and go through Friday, Saturday, and there'll be 2 different rooms going most of the time. And then Sunday will end about 1 o'clock. So it should be an exciting weekend. I'm going to be speaking on, let's see, Friday at 2, I think, right in here somewhere. Okay, first room, I guess. There we go. There I am. 2:15 to 3 p.m. We're going to be speaking on the Nephilim connection to the Israeli-Iranian war. And then on December, let's see, that would be Friday, so Saturday, I should be in the other room. Let's see, where am I at? In here somewhere. Okay, anyway, the second one is going to be entitled the Dead Sea Scrolls in End Time Prophecy. So we're going to look at several things like that. I wanted to share just a couple things with you tonight. And last week we kind of stopped and we went through just some titles of some new scrolls that have come out and why we're looking at them and those kind of things. But so let me back out of this. So again, this is going to be the upcoming conference, Christmas and Branson Prophecy Conference. So, and the hotel is completely sold out. You can still get the conference and watch it live stream, or possibly even attend if you can find another place, another hotel in the area. All that stuff is on this website. So the next thing I wanted to share with you is this is our website. I've kind of revamped it. I try to revamp it a little bit every December. So basically what we're doing, kind of redid it just a little bit. The studies are just the same. The Canon studies, Dead Sea Scroll studies, and we'll have other studies there. So like for Dead Sea Scroll studies, if you come in here, we've got the digital library from the Israeli Antiquities Department, our DSS calendar site, and then like the Dead Sea Scroll Old Testament, if you're interested in that, and different things. So Then we have PDFs. We separated that into 4 places: articles, Bible, reference PDFs, cults, and then other, all the prophecy stuff. We'll have a prophecy studies over here eventually. And then photos and files. We've got the photos of the altar of Joshua, the prophecy charts that we go to occasionally, and then eSword and MySword files if you have eSword or MySword on your phones or tablets or computers. The other thing is these are all the same thing, Bible Facts channels. We do have an email right here. So if you want to email questions at biblefacts.org, you can do that there. We have a Telegram channel, and this is our main YouTube channel that we're on now. We have a second YouTube channel, which is going to be just manuscripts. I'll show you that in a minute. And then over at Prophecy Watchers, they have a playlist of things that I've done. So, and we do have a Rumble account. So we had those things syncing where we actually have a Rumble account, and we tried Odyssey also, where they would automatically sync up, but some sort of a problem, or somebody didn't want to do it or whatever. So we're looking into other things to do. But usually 2 or 3 days after we do a live stream, they would show up over there. So here's my home church, Calvary Chapel Finder, and some other things. This is a place called Reclaim the Net. We're going to take a peek at it in a minute. They're a group, secular group, but they're privacy orientated. So anything that has to do with privacy, people spying on you, problems with social media platforms, legislation that's going on, things that you might want to know. Really good place to do. And of course, they have lists of what they think is the most reliable browser, most freedom in a platform. Let's see, different things like that, email and things. So anyway, and then we have Blue Letter Bible, very good source to go for an online Bible. Real Life Network with Jack Hibbs. He's a Calvary Chapel guy in California, so I'd recommend that to him. I actually have not got on that yet, but I'm sure it would be good. Truth Social. It's mainly political, but it's beginning to be other things also. Got a note the other day that they finally got Truth Plus, which is this one here, connected with it. You can log on the same way. A lot of news, but then they're going to have a lot of other TV programming. Daystar Network and the Word Network, and there's 2 or 3 Christian networks that are on there also. And Lighthouse Trails is a good place to go to see current heretical movements in different churches. So very, very important. We have our About Us calendar, our Statement of Faith, and our network. So as you know, when you're on a major platform, sometimes you get censored depending on who it is and what they don't like. And it's probably true with everybody. But this is a platform we did with Mighty Networks. And theoretically, anyway, at the moment, they're just interested in making money. So that's good. So we can say whatever we want. It's a private network, kind of like a Facebook group. So we have groups for Hagi, the herbal medicine, and prophecy and things like that. So, and here's our public calendar we just put up last week, I showed you. So here's, if you click on it, it's just a Trello board. Trello is a fantastic thing we started using for organization. But this is December, so you can see Thursday through Sunday is going to be that conference in Branson. And then because of that, we'll get back probably sometime on Monday, most likely. It all depends on what they're doing and what else is going on. So the Monday and Tuesday following are canceled. We will have our normal broadcast and Tuesday night Bible study at my home on the 16th and 17th. But we will cancel them again for the next 2 weeks, which is right before Christmas and right before New Year's. So right in here. So hopefully this will help out a lot for those things, just having those things to research. So that's our other one. Our YouTube channel is here. This is what we're doing now, this particular one. And we have, if you go all the way down to the bottom, this is the one with our 85,000 subscribers. And thank you all for subscribing. And but this is the one we're going to do all of our in-depth studies on. Our second channel, which is this one right here, is the Bible Facts manuscripts. And what we're trying to do is just put the manuscripts like the King James Bible, all the different 66 books, that kind of a thing up here. Only this is not the Bible, it would be other scrolls. So we've got the Epistle of Barnabas we're working on currently. We're getting that up chapter by chapter. We do have the entire book of Gad the Seer and the book of 3rd Corinthians. That's a real small one. So we're working on other things too. I think we should have part of the Didache up here too. You can always go to videos. Eventually we'll try to put those all in one video, separated by chapters, except for really, really huge ones like Enoch and the others. They'll eventually be up here too. So as you can see, we'll have Barnabas, Gad, 3rd Corinthians, and yeah, there's part of the Didache. So we're working on it. So this should be interesting. Hopefully we'll be able to have those out for people to study on their own. And again, if we go back to the main channel, this is where we'll have our stuff. We'll continue to do our Tuesday or our Monday night studies with our Q&A, and then go forward from there and see how we can do that. I'd like to be able to do more things on this as soon as I get a handful of translations done. So we'll get back to that. The other thing I wanted to share with you is if we go back to here, not that one, but our regular website, we do have our Telegram channel and our email here. So if we go to Telegram, Telegram is a really good place. It's not end-to-end encrypted like most people think. And the people that started it wanted a platform where nobody could spy on you, etc. You can have it set to public or private or whatever. But there was a lot of push. The two guys that originally started it were from St. Petersburg in Russia. And then Russia wanted a back door and they said, no, thank you. So they moved. And the current headquarters, I think, is in Dubai, if I remember correctly. And they have dual citizenship and they're living in France. And if you remember correctly, just a few months ago, they got arrested, or he got arrested, one of the guys, and was basically got a lot of charges because he was accused of helping pedophiles and everything else, because he's not going to let people come into the network and see what's going on. So he kind of was forced to finally to allow, if a government did a subpoena, they would be allowed to see things. And I don't think that's a problem for us. The main idea, as far as what we have, is we want a platform where we can say the Bible says this, and if that's offensive, it's offensive. It, whatever, it says what it says. We want to be able to do that and not have somebody just push a button and we're deleted. So that's one of those type of things. So this is our Bible Facts channel. It's BibleFacts.org on here. This is what we did last week. Epistle of Barnabas, just came out. New Scrolls for 2025 is what we did last week. And then I wanted to mention this. I put this in here. We were talking last week about switching over to Linux. Like I was saying, that this particular setup here that I'm broadcasting on used to be Windows, switched over to Linux. Main reason is because of recall. And so this is an update. This guy here is Chris Titus, and you can go to his website. He's the one that has the Windows utility that you can download, and it will automatically turn off things that you don't want. So if you don't want OneDrive or the virus scanner or a Microsoft Office or whatever, or maybe you want some other Linux type program in place of those. You don't want Adobe Photoshop, but you do want GIMP or something like that. Real quick clicks just to download and have everything work. And so one of the things, this is a video he did a ways back. Recall is supposed to be a thing that records, takes a screenshot of your monitor every 5 seconds. And the idea is to compile it through AI and figure out what I'm doing, and then hopefully give me a coupon to get whatever I'm looking for a discount. And they make money, we make money, that kind of thing. But that's incredibly evasive, because if I have my bank accounts up, credit card numbers, social security numbers, because I'm doing my banking or something, and something is taking snapshots of it, that's you may or may not trust Microsoft with that information, but if I have a virus, it just makes it that much easier to see what I'm doing. And it should at least be an on-off option type thing. And so they said they were going to, then they said they were not, then they said it's not going to be an option, it's going to be mandatory in the next version of Windows, which should be out by now. So anyway, they were going to just turn it off like normal, but they found out if you turn off the recall, and you can go, if you watch the video here, this one, he'll show you how to just go into a terminal and type in the command to look and see if the program is in there. And you'll see that it is, and it's active. It's not inactive. So that was kind of interesting. But if you go ahead and disable those, which you can, it breaks the Windows File Explorer. And what in this video, I think he found out that they're not directly connected, but they have dependencies that are connected with each other. So hopefully he'll have a way to just turn that off. So Windows is like the platform almost everyone uses. And then second to that is probably Mac. And then third to that is Linux. Linux is only, it's like doubled in the last month because of this stuff, but it's still only like 4%, something like that. But anyway, so we'll talk about that later. Some of you were asking about it. Could we do a video on that? And because one of the things, if we can turn that off, you can keep using Windows and not be spied on. So they'll eventually be able to do that. It's just one of those things like one country gets nukes, then the other country gets nukes, and they get bigger ones, and they get bigger ones, and this consistent balance of power. The main thing that we need to do, though, is to have government officials say, we're not going to stand for that. Create a law, make it where it's illegal so that they back off from it. And I'm very thankful that Trump is in office now, going to take over, and we'll hopefully see a lot of those things. They're talking about severely, hopefully this will happen, but severely downing at least the income tax. Because that's, again, you can't have a bunch of militias or people trying to get you or check you or do things to you if they don't get paid. Nobody's going to work for free, in other words. So the basic idea is to cut funding for all those things. So anyway, we'll see what happens, but this is here. So if you want to look at it yourself, if you want to stay on Windows, otherwise you can hop over to Linux. Linux is getting much, much better than it used to be. I've played around with it for a good 20, 30 years, and it never was able, there's still some problems with it, but now Windows is beginning to have problems. So anyway, this is the Branson conference that we just talked about, if you want to link to it, and then our thing here. So this is just our channel. You can't really comment on it. You can give us thumbs up, but it's just for us to let you know what's going on. Currently, we have a little over 3,100 members on that. One other one I wanted to share you, this is Amir's channel. And of course, he's going to have all sorts of different videos and details from the wars going on that they may or may not allow you to have or see on Facebook or whatever. I think you guys know a lot about that. So this is something about the Syrian rebels. Here's an example of, here's a map of Syria. And you can see there's Syria there, and he's showing you the different parts. That's Kurdistan, where the Kurds are, and different places where they're attacking and things. So it can keep you updated on a lot of things. Let's see here. Let's see if there's anything else in here. Thought there was one. Okay, I guess that's pretty much it. Spokesman update. And then also, we talked about Reclaim the Net. On my website, we have a link to their website. They also have a channel here. And so half the stuff is free to look at. So here's an example of just some of the articles. Chaos in Pakistan, and there were internet blackouts to try to suppress the protests. So again, anything connected, not just with a fight going on somewhere or war, but something with freedom of speech type stuff. So an internet blackout would kind of qualify. Here's an example of in California, they had a what do they call that? Satire thing. So I can't make fun of somebody. Like if I am pro-Trump or pro-Harris or whatever, and I make fun of the other one, I could actually go to jail or get fined or whatever. And so Rumble got sued or got fined for that. And so they're suing California because you can't do that. It's satire, shouldn't be able to do that. So here's an example of UK conservatives in England slamming the Labour Party because they're trying to push for blasphemy laws. And you guys probably remember blasphemy laws in Muslim countries. If you say you're Christian or something else, not Muslim, it's akin to saying, I don't believe that Muhammad is a prophet, which means I'm blaspheming him. And I could theoretically go to jail, have my house taken away. Some of the countries will do that. So the idea that anybody that would be pro-blasphemy laws anywhere at all would be weird. But anyway, Smith & Wesson and some of the other gun manufacturers, gun shows and stuff like that are being really hard pressed on some of the other networks. So they're hopping on Rumble. Meta is pushing for a digital ID. That sounds like a good idea. You don't want kids on the internet looking at things they're not supposed to look at. But that means you and I are going to have to prove that we're not children by probably giving a copy of a driver's license or something. And that stuff like that can lead to all sorts of problems. And if you just ask me to say I'm actually over 18, anybody can lie. So the whole point is kind of ridiculous, very evasive. Again, if these guys were good, it wouldn't be a problem, but you never know if like I'm a good guy or a bad guy. So there should always be checks and balances. That's what our Constitution says. So just some different things. Blue Sky is being targeted now because it's a new network. More online stuff. Police in somewhere are using facial recognition. So again, if you just happen to be out in a crowd and something bad happens and they decide they want to arrest everybody in the crowd, they have your pictures. So that kind of stuff is really, really iffy. New FCC chairman vows to end big tech's grip on free speech. So we'll see what happens. Austria is trying to do the digital IDs. So it just goes on like this. They also have a place where, I think I told you, where they would recommend the best browsers, the best email, things like that. So last time I looked, for instance, the best email that they have is, let's see here, Proton Mail and a couple of others. We use Proton Mail, so that works out good. And they just have different ones, different things like that. Telegram is a very good one that they recommend for that kind of stuff. So just wanted to share that with you. Let me go ahead and go to our study for tonight. This is just kind of a quick overview. Just a couple of points that I'm going to bring out in the conference that I think is going to be really interesting. Things that I haven't realized until I actually go back through and read these stuff. Our first one is going to be, that's actually our second one. Our first one is going to be the Nephilim connection to the Iranian war. And basically, I'm not going to cover a whole lot to that. Basically, we're going to go through the start to finish of the Iranian war as prophesied, not what's actually going on now, but what's prophesied. And of course, we will begin to see that it is what's going on now. And basically, we have one scroll telling us that the reason the whole thing starts is for certain demonic activity. Certain fallen angels were released. And when I first read that, I thought, nah, that's because they don't get released until the end, when they're judged. And then I realized in Revelation, it's talking about there are 4 angels that are chained under Euphrates that get loosed in the middle of the tribulation period. Now, we're not in the tribulation period yet, but same thing. Certain angels get released at certain times. So that's pretty interesting. So you get a nice country. Iran has always been decent. I mean, as far back as I can remember, they've always been good friends with Israel since Israel started, until the current regime that wants to, Shiite Muslim. Anyway, so it's an interesting thing there. We can begin to see what things might be demonic and which ones may not be. So anyway, so then we've got a lot of stuff going on there. Let me go to, and that's going to be from that's our latest book, Ancient Prophecies from the Dead Sea Scrolls. and then the book of Enoch. So we're going to be talking about some of the end time prophecy things that are specifically from this book. The two main prophecy books from the Dead Sea Scrolls that I have created or published has been the Testaments of the Patriarchs, and then this book, the Ancient Prophecies from the Dead Sea Scrolls. We kind of compartmentalized them because the Dead Sea Scrolls talk about the ancient ones, the patriarchs, and that's from Adam to Aaron. They all wrote a last will and testament, and we knew a lot about them, but that didn't really have them until the fragments we have now. So just to give you an example, I'll kind of come back to that, the reason why I'm doing some of these studies. So when I was in seminary, we talked about the Testament of the 12 Patriarchs, which is in the Armenian canon, Armenian or Syrian, one of those, one of the Orthodox canons. Most of the Orthodox will have like an extra book, different book, each one of them. There's Greek Orthodox, Russian Orthodox, stuff like that. But one of them had the Testament of the 12 Patriarchs, and it was extremely Christian in theology. So I remember talking to my professor, this would be a fantastic thing to publish, to put out, to use to witness. And he said, no, it wouldn't, because here's what's going to happen. People are going to say it's way too Christian. And the story is that in the Middle Ages, somebody found Hebrew manuscripts in some caves in Judea. And they brought them to the patriarch, and he thought, wow, these are real. So he translates them into Greek, and that's why we have it in the canon. So the question is going to be, where are the Hebrew originals? Don't know. They were sold, they were old anyway. We probably got rid of them after you got them in the Bible now, so you don't need them. Well, that's a nice story, but there's no evidence that anything like that could exist. And it doesn't seem logical, that there would be Christians or Christian type theology pre-Christ. So, I thought, okay, whatever. But then in the 1940s and on up, we have the Dead Sea Scrolls, and fragments of four of those, 4 of the 12 were actually found in the Dead Sea Scrolls. So that doesn't mean that they're real necessarily, but it means that the story that the patriarch gave is real. Somebody found whole copies in the Dead Sea, in the hills of Judea, and translated them into Greek. And maybe it's a good translation, maybe it's not, but that's how it got in their canon. But apparently it's a real story because we have found fragments of the same thing in the hills of Judea now. So that's why it's really important. So plus all the others. So anyway, now to go along with those lines, another one I was doing, let me hop back here real quick to this so I can show you what we're doing. So in here, if you go to our bookstore, and you can see what we're doing. So this is the Testaments of the Patriarchs, and this is the one that we're using. So after we did this, we put together the Damascus Covenant. Now, there's not much prophecy in it, but it's all the theology and the history of the Essenes. But I was reading it, putting it together, and I thought, man, this sure sounds familiar, like I've read it somewhere before. So there's this guy, R.H. Charles, that put together a book, I think it's called Old Testament Pseudepigrapha, or something like that, I forget. Anyway, he had a copy of some unknown Essene type scroll that he got from the Geniza. That's a very large library in Egypt. They currently have some, last time I checked on it, they had some 40,000 Hebrew manuscripts that have not even been cataloged yet. They're all medieval, so most people say, well, it's Middle Ages, who cares? But the thing is, he had a complete copy from the Geniza, and it matched perfectly this Damascus covenant that I've got here. So I'm looking at the one in Hebrew from the Dead Sea Scrolls with the holes. He's got a completely perfect one from that library. Now that was medieval, but I'm looking at the one pre-BC, and it's the same. And I was able to use his to fill in the holes. So I can just say, this part's missing in the Dead Sea Scroll, but in the Geniza it says he said, or whatever. And so point being, now we've got two of these things. There is a medieval copy of the Testament of the 12 Patriarchs in somebody's Bible, and you don't know if it's, presumably it would be fake, because, who knows. But now we have found scrolls that prove that it was real. There is a copy of something called a Damascus Covenant in the Geniza, medieval, so who cares? But now we have a copy of it with holes in it, but still a copy in the Dead Sea Scrolls. So you can see where I'm going with this. So if the Dead Sea Scrolls talk about this book should exist and this book should exist, but it's not in the Dead Sea Scrolls, we need to start looking for a copy of something that kind of fits. Hopefully there's only one out there, and hopefully there is one out there, and begin to look at these things as we wait for them to be discovered in the Dead Sea Scrolls. So that's the kind of thing that we're doing. So last week I talked about a manuscript from the Geniza that had a compilation of the stories about Shemyaza and Azazel, which are pretty interesting. Again, medieval, but could very easily be older. And the thing is, when you go through this manuscript, I went through it this week, I was working on it earlier this morning, but when you go through it, it starts talking about certain dreams that some of the giants had pre-flood. Well, it turns out it's identical to the Book of Giants in the Dead Sea Scrolls. So according to this manuscript, the stories that are in what's called the Book of Giants from the Dead Sea Scrolls are actually part of a larger book called the History of Shemyaza and Azazel. So, and that makes sense because that's what it is. So at least part of it is not made up in the Middle Ages. It's at least 200 BC or so. And so more and more things are coming out like that. And I think we need to pull those together. Be careful, because stuff made in the Middle Ages, most of it is garbage. But there are some things, and if there's some sort of evidence like that, we need to kind of pull them together. So that's kind of the stuff that we're talking about this week. I wanted to share one thing in particular with you. Let me see where it's at here. There's a mysterious 70-year prophecy we're going to talk about. Okay, this one here. Now I want to just share this with you, this one thing, and go real slow with it, because something hit me the other day, that because this is what I put together published last spring. And one thing I didn't realize on this. So this is from 4Q 246. It's an Aramaic study on Daniel. And so 4Q20, that means it was found in cave 4, and it was fragment or scroll number 246. Anyway, it's written in Aramaic, not Hebrew, but that makes sense because Daniel was mainly in Aramaic. So it's a study on Daniel. So it basically tells us that the Antichrist will rule for only 7 years through a group of nations. Okay, it doesn't actually tell us it's 10. We know that from Revelation and other places, but the group of nations. The 7-year rule will end at the start of the millennium. So we already know that from Revelation also, so not a big deal. But the fact that it's detailed in a scroll is interesting. But at first, when we look at this, it seems like that's the only thing it's saying. But if we look closer, we learn something very interesting. And it says, actually, their kingdom, talking about the 10 nations, the group of nations the Antichrist works with and only lasts for 7 years. So their kingdom will be like the shooting stars you saw in the vision. They will reign only 7 years over the earth. And then we have a hole in the manuscript. Okay, it says, then the people of God will arise and will rest from the sword. So the kingdom, the Messianic kingdom, will be here. His kingdom, it says, will be an everlasting kingdom, and everyone will walk in truth. Okay, so that fits perfectly with a 10-nation and Antichrist, a 7-year tribulation period, and a millennial reign. But what we just skipped right over and didn't give a second thought to is the Essenes are known to be 100% accurate prophets. And they're obviously students of prophecy. If I was to take a class from you, say to like learn piano or something, You're an expert. I'm a student. I'm wanting to learn. So that means I'm a student of the piano. You're a master of the piano, or you couldn't be teaching me. So usually it's called, you're the father of the piano and I'm the son of the piano. That's just another way of saying student and master. And so what's interesting about this is um, this whole thing here, if you look at it, you have a study from people who are prophets. You and I are students of the prophecies. We're not prophets. But this is saying here, and this is something that's from a Daniel study. It could be, and there are people that talk about a second book of Daniel. And what they're usually talking about, and I would just call it a commentary, but there's extra information in there that Daniel didn't have. So, for instance, in the Aramaic version of Daniel proper that we have in the Dead Sea Scrolls, it's identical to what we have. There's one piece in it, though, that talks about how wicked the Israelites were getting and that they sacrificed their children to demons. Well, that's actually not in the book of Daniel, but the way it begins to describe it, I would imagine that would be there. So one more little piece of information in a fragment. So they're getting their information from somewhere. Remember, these people are supposed to be 100% accurate prophets. But now if you look at this really careful, someone is talking to Daniel. So the concept here is that apparently he had a vision and an angel came and is explaining the vision. It's none of the visions that are in the book of Daniel. But this is what it says. Their kingdom will be like shooting stars, not just shooting stars, but the shooting stars you saw in the vision. So Daniel had a vision, apparently about shooting stars, and the angel is telling us that represents the 10 nations, because they're only going to be here for 7 years compared to an empire that might be here for hundreds of years. That's really short. And it's like a shooting star that brightens the sky for just a second and then boom, it's gone. It just means it's really, really short. So what this is telling us here is that there's another piece of Daniel somewhere. So if that was the case, why wouldn't it be in the book of Daniel? It's kind of iffy. So let me go on down here. Here's an example. And I've talked about this before, but this is Daniel 12:4. Daniel's being talked to by an angel. And he says, as for you, Daniel, conceal these words and seal up the book until the time of the end. Many will go back and forth, and knowledge will increase. Now, Irenaeus against heresies, this is his book Against Heresies 426. He's talking about this verse, and he says, Daniel the prophet says, shut up the words and seal the book even to the time of the consummation, or the end, when everything's fulfilled, until many learn and knowledge be completed. You learn the rest of the story. Now you know the whole story. It's completed. For at that time, when the dispersion shall be accomplished, they will know all these things. So the dispersion we're talking about is actually the dispersion of Israel by the Romans. So they were kicked out of their country after the Bar Kokhba rebellion in 135. They came back to their country in 1948. So the question is, when he says, when the dispersion shall be accomplished, what does that mean? The start or the finish? And if you look at it very carefully, it means the entire thing is finished. So what he's saying, he doesn't know it's going to be 1948, but when Israel comes back, that's when these things begin to be fulfilled. So when Israel comes back in 1948, many will go to and fro, back and forth, and knowledge will increase. Just because they're running around in Israel? Well, yes, they discover caves with scrolls and knowledge increases. So very important for this. And of course, we add to that Isaiah 29, which talks about the time when Israel comes back for the second time, very, very clearly the 1948 return. And it begins at that time, the old ones begin to speak out of the dust of the earth, which, if I'm wanting an answer from my dead grandfather, if I can't conjure him because I can't get his ghost to be here, the only other way he could tell me anything is if he left a written record. Then it really would be words from my dead grandfather telling me what I want to learn from, a letter that he wrote while he was alive. Well, these things apparently are buried in the dirt because it's like a ghost coming up out of the dirt, a dead person telling me something from the dirt. Anyway, so you put all this together, it points directly to the Dead Sea Scrolls. But this is interesting here. Seal up the book until the end time. Now, the book of Daniel was never sealed up, like put aside. From his time, the very beginning, it was put in the canon, and it's been in the canon all this time. So the book of Daniel as a whole has never been sealed up. But something connected with the book, apparently Daniel's book, because that's who we're talking about and who we're talking to, is going to be sealed up until the end time, which according to Irenaeus is 1948 and beyond. So sometime after 1948, these things should come to light. The interesting thing about it is we're trying to figure this stuff out, and we've been going through a prophecy study all the way up to, we're getting ready to do chapter 12 of Daniel, which we'll probably do when we get back. Not this time, but next time. Get back from the conference. And so at this point, then, the question is, what is part of that book that was not sealed that was sealed? So we have a basic outline of end time prophecy, which we need to memorize the points, be really, really familiar with Daniel. And then the Ezra Apocalypse, which is not Daniel, so that's not what we're talking about here. But the Ezra Apocalypse, which was included in the King James 1611, which is quoted by apparently Jesus and Luke and a couple of Dead Sea Scrolls. I didn't even realize that until Lee Brainerd pointed that out. He's going to be at the conference, by the way. You can ask him about it. So this is interesting. It talks about how the Roman Empire falls and comes back and different things that happen with it. Then there is another manuscript, again, not a Dead Sea Scroll, but a medieval manuscript. But again, what did we find out about medieval manuscripts? If it's going to be like the Testament of the 12 Patriarchs or the Damascus Covenant or one of the others that are quoted, then we can begin to look at some of these things. So the seventh vision of Daniel is a medieval manuscript. There's nothing about that in the Dead Sea Scrolls yet, but there are hints, like we saw. If there's ever a vision of Daniel where they're shooting stars, that would be one we would want to look at. Could very easily be made up, but it's just something to look at. So, and like this manuscript from the Geniza about the life story of Azazel and Shemyaza, quoting a piece of a story which is identical to the Book of Giants in the Dead Sea Scrolls. So there's no way that somebody making something up in the Middle Ages would quote a Dead Sea Scroll, unless, it's somewhere. So those are the kind of things we're trying to put together. Remember, the Bible is the only rule and guide of faith and the only thing we know for sure. But if it's got prophecies that more things come to light, not necessarily even prophecies, but more things come to light as we get to the way Irenaeus would explain it, 1948 and beyond. That's pretty interesting. So I just wanted to point this out to you because this I knew a lot of, but I never thought about matching that with this one here. The idea that it would be like the shooting stars you saw in the vision. What vision? Don't have a record of it. So that would be interesting to get a hold of. So this other manuscript is talking about dates and different things. And some of the evidences are interesting in it because it describes events you could clearly identify, and then it gives you a date. And so if we're talking about Jubilee periods and we use the Dead Sea Scroll calendar, it comes out perfectly to where it should be. So again, even if it was fake, they would have to know the Dead Sea Scroll calendar, which was not known in the Middle Ages, and write this down, of which it would be rejected because nobody knew about the calendar back in that time. So all these little internal evidences to let us know we're working with something that might still be garbled, but has a basis in reality or truth. So just wanted to share a few of those things with you. Those are a couple of the things we're going to be talking about at the upcoming conference. We've got quite a few others, but just to let you know about those things. So we'll go ahead and stop for today, and we'll go to the chat room, see if there's any other questions, and hopefully we can have some interesting conversations. So let me go to here. Okay, and the first one is Bob gave a super chat, $10. Thank you very much for the donation. Been watching great interviews with you and Josh Peck. Was mentioned that these Essene prophecies were deemed 100% correct. Yeah, the ones that are fulfilled, you can't argue with them. So pretty interesting. And if you are you could say the whole thing is garbage if you're not a Christian. But if you are a Christian and you believe the New Testament, and you've got somebody that predates the rabbis saying, we've always believed that the Messiah is God incarnate, he's going to come to die for our sins and start the age of grace. And that event is right here on our calendar. And again, once you get the calendar understood, that's when it happened, exact year. And so it really begins to be spooky. There's no way you can accidentally get these things right. So it's fantastic that we have those. And according to Daniel, it's sealed until the end. According to Irenaeus, that's what we're talking, and Isaiah 29, that's what we're talking about. So yeah, thank you. Can you discuss that? Also reading the End Times by the Ancient Church Fathers. That's another one too. That's just from the early church fathers. But it shows that they believe in a premillennial, pre-tribulational concept, pre-tribulational rapture, all that kind of stuff. And that's good enough. That just lets us know that we're interpreting everything correctly. But they also give a little other things, like you've got to wait until the kingdom of Rome splits in two. Then after that, it will be dissolved, and then there'll be 10 nations. Then there'll be an antichrist. So we have to go in order. Don't look for an antichrist now because it hasn't even been split, in their day, 170. So very interesting things that they have to talk about. Not a whole lot, but some really interesting things. Yeah, the Essene prophets were supposed to be 100% accurate. They lived to be 120-ish, when everyone else lived to be in their 60s. And they were even asked, I've got a couple of quotes in one of the manuscripts, where Josephus actually asked them, why did they think they lived that long? What's their secret? And they said it's their devotion to God, their avoidance of anger, which I'm thinking is better translated stress in general. So any kind of negative emotion, whether you get really sad, really angry, whatever, avoid that kind of emotion, which for them it was probably mainly anger and fear, Romans killing you and everything. And then their herbal medicine and their diet. And so we have been trying to go through and redo the herbal medicine stuff. Whatever they say, the book of Haggai doesn't seem to exist, at least not yet, at least as far as I know. But there are quotes from it or pieces of it all over in the scrolls. So we're trying to pull those together. So things like the intermittent fasting that they practiced, we're not sure how long or that kind of thing, but just some general ideas like that. They had to have a good amount of exercise. Simply getting up in the mornings and tending the sheep, it's like living on a farm. There's a good amount of exercise. And just different things like that. And we know about some of their herbal medicine, some things that were copied in other languages. So we look at those up in the other languages and try to backwards research them. So very, very fascinating. And they talk about certain things, not so much an event like a prophecy like we think, but movements. when it begins to move toward an Antichrist system, it's going to be like this. They teach us to avoid Nephilim medicine, and they're very descriptive on what that is, especially if you go back to these old scrolls like the Book of Giants and things like that. It's definitely here at this point, and we as Christians are to avoid that. Excuse me. But yeah, it's pretty interesting. Thank you very much for that question. Patrick says, question, any evidence Daniel was written before the empires it prophesied to arise? The oldest copy appears to date after, debating a skeptical friend about the prophecy. Well, that's the problem. Like, for instance, I always give the example of Habakkuk. I can't prove to you that what we have in the Bible is the actual thing that Habakkuk wrote, or any of them really. The only thing we could do is go back to what used to be 1000 AD, and that's the oldest manuscript. Then the Dead Sea Scrolls were found, and they date to anywhere from, 1st century AD to back about 200 BC, somewhere in that neighborhood. So that's fantastic because they're identical, and that shows that they haven't been tampered with, at least from 200 BC forward. But that doesn't mean that somebody couldn't have tampered with them, like for Habakkuk, for instance, or you're talking about Daniel in the 5th century, between 500 and 200 BC, 300 years. It's a lot less time than we had before, but still could be tampered with. And that's the thing you'll find in a lot of Bibles, that it's too accurate, especially chapter 11. It has to be written by somebody in the Maccabean period. Well, I don't think anybody ever tries to put it after the Maccabean period, because there's too many people quoting it and talking about it for it to be that new. And the thing is, in chapter 11, if you look at it very carefully, it talks about all the different battles between the two Greek states of Syria, the Seleucid Empire in Syria and the Ptolemaic Empire in Egypt. And it actually goes up to the time of the ships of Kittim or Rome come and establish a peace. They take over the other two. Eventually, there is a war between the Romans and the Jews, and it says the end thereof is the desolation of their whole country, the Jewish country, the burning of the temple. There's an expulsion, or King James calls it a captivity, an expulsion and a burning and a dissolution at the end. So whoever wrote Daniel chapter 11, if you're going to say it's a Jew in the 2nd century BC, like Antiochus Epiphanes, where they normally put it, then he's still a prophet because he accurately predicted the ships of Rome coming, which hadn't come yet. And we all know Rome came when Jesus was born. The Romans were there. So, and they did the temple was burned in 70 AD, and there was major fights like the Bar Kokhba rebellion, and then it was finally crushed, and the entire country was dissolved. So when you look at that, chapter 11, it's too accurate to be written by a guy in the 5th century. But the best they can do is say that it was forged in the 2nd century BC, but it still predicts events all the way up to 70 AD and 132 AD. So there's no way around it at that point. You have to realize this is prophetic, and then Israel is dispersed, and somehow Israel comes back. So we understand that's a gap of 1800 years, and then things begin again. And when you plug in Obadiah, Zephaniah, and some of the other prophecies, Jeremiah 49, Enoch 56, it's what's going on now. So very interesting stuff. But that's what I would say. I've been through that a lot of times. It's way too accurate to be real, but it's still real. I mean, you'd have to come out and say Daniel was written after 135 AD, because they would have not known about the burning, the desolation, and the expulsion for a great amount of time. And they wouldn't have known it was going to be a great amount of time too, unless it was probably 100 years later. So those are the kind of things that we would look at. I'm glad you're talking with skeptics and trying to encourage them and get them to think. That's prophecy is like the main way we can get people to realize these things are real. Why is Pentecost 15 Pentecost on the 15th of Sivan on the Dead Sea Scroll calendar, but the 6th of Sivan in Exodus as when the Jews made their covenant with God? Good question. Let's look at it real quick. See if it actually is. Let's see. There we go. So let's just take this one here. So Pentecost, did you say Pentecost? Yeah, Pentecost. Pentecost we've got on, yeah, Sivan 15, and you're saying Exodus has it on the 6th. Okay. Good question. I don't know. This is just the calendar that they made, and I don't know all the details to it, but this is when they celebrate Pentecost. And Pentecost is supposed to be exactly 50 days after the first fruits of the barley harvest. So you've got Passover. No matter how you look at this, Nisan 14 is the preparation for the Passover. The 15th to the 21st is unleavened bread. And so then you've got the first fruits of the barley harvest on the morrow after the Sabbath, which would be Sunday. So 50 days on top of this would put it right here on Pentecost. So that's interesting about the 6th. I've heard things about the 5th too. So we would have to look that up. I'm not sure exactly why, other than the fact that it may have actually, the one in Exodus may have occurred. Well, actually, so Pentecost though. The one in Exodus though is very clearly on the 15th of Nisan. And then the day after the Sabbath would be here, either here or here. In either way, 50 days later would be, put it either here or here. So it'd have to be on a Sunday. All those festivals of first fruits are on a Sunday. You've got barley harvest, Pentecost, which is wheat harvest, new wine, which is a grape harvest, and new oil, which is a olive harvest. So, and those all existed. We just don't have all the deals exactly, the details rather, in Exodus and Leviticus. Didn't answer that really, but question, I guess the answer is not sure. What is your opinion on the timing of the end of the age? Dead Sea Scroll calendar has 2075, but given the current technology and events, how can we possibly go 40 plus more years? It's a good question. The only thing I can say is that there's that's what happened the first time. So the Jesus came in 32 AD, give or take a year, however you want to do that. But when he came and he died on the cross, that Pentecost starts the church age, and it goes forward. And then some 40 years later is the end of the age on their calendar. So the end of the age of grace on their calendar then would be 2075. The end of the church age, if it was exactly 2,000 years, I don't know if it will be or not, but if it is, would be 2032, that same 40-year gap. So I think probably what we're talking about is there's a church age, which is one thing. There is a age of grace proper on the calendar, which is another thing. What the exact gap is, well, we know time-wise, year-wise, what the gap is. But how that works together, we don't really know. Also remember, just because we have a set date calendar, we're told that the rapture could happen at any time. And assuming that the rapture is exactly the same year, even, give or take a year, of the beginning of the tribulation period, and then there's 7 years, and then a second coming. It doesn't necessarily mean the second coming, for instance, would be in the year 2075. Something eventful happens in 2075, and it's either the second coming, or if that whole thing is pushed back, it very easily could have been that the Lord comes, the second coming occurs maybe in 2032, which would be the end of the church age. And then there might be, he could snap his fingers and just create a millennial temple. But if he chooses not to do that and wants us to build part of it, it may take 10 or 20 or 30 years even to build a temple of that size, or whatever else is going on at the time. So the official ages are there. The finishing parts are not. So for instance, the end of the age of chaos, the beginning of the age of Torah, is the year 2000, and it starts with Abraham, But Abraham was 52 years old at the time. He didn't even quite get into the land of Canaan yet. Nimrod had tried to kill him once, and it goes on another 123 years, the bickering back and forth, him destroying Chedorlaomer, and then eventually Esau killing Nimrod, which ended the empire. So we're talking about a time on a calendar that's a specific time, and somewhere around that is this stage of events that either start or end somewhere in that time period, but touch on that. So I don't know why the Lord didn't be a little more specific on that, other than apparently he didn't want to be really specific on that. Hi Ken, I am just wondering, what is your opinion on the Shroud of Turin's authenticity? I find it fascinating. I always have went back and forth on it, but it's really hard to say that it's probably not real. It's not supernatural, at least. Uh, Several years ago at one of the prophecy conferences, I got to meet Barry Schwartz, who was one of the guys that did all the photographs and the testing and stuff on the shroud. And he was Jewish. Didn't say he was a Christian. He's just a guy taking pictures, you know. And so he really thought it was going to be super easy. You just shake the red part and look at it and find out it's paint instead of blood, you know, stuff like that. Comes to find out it's blood. And then, well, somebody could put blood on there. If it was actually human blood from deep inside, it would have other types of serum, not just red blood, but other fluids. So that probably wouldn't be there because somebody just puts a piece of lamb blood on it. Well, it was human blood, and those other serums were there also. And so he began to look at this very carefully and try to undo it many different ways. But it's obviously a real burial shroud of a guy that was crucified, was human, obviously, human blood, and then to have the crown of thorns, that's just like Jesus, and that didn't happen very often. So he finally, after researching it, came out and says, I'm not a Christian. I don't believe in Christianity, but I believe that was the burial shroud of Jesus. Apparently there was a Jesus, and that actually happened, and that's got to be it. I just thought that was interesting. And so he's passed on now, but amazing guy. So again, it's I've heard all sorts of theories on how it could be done. But for instance, just think of the shroud itself without anything else. It's a negative image on cloth. Now, it takes some practice to get a negative image on film so that you can make a photograph. But how do you do that on cloth? It's just not the easiest thing to do. It would have to be a large amount of radiation from somewhere. Now, we could probably do that now, but I mean, you're exposing a human, hopefully, or maybe a corpse, but a human being to a massive amount of radiation, which is not good. But somehow to get the negative image on there. When we dropped the bombs in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, some of the people were vaporized, but their images were left as negatives on the walls. So we're talking about a lot of energy to do something like that. So the question is, how would that happen other than Jesus coming back to life? And if it's fake, how does a human being get access to radiation and know what they're doing to create a negative image on a cloth? So those are just some basic questions. You know, you basically dwindle it down and realize it's not fake per se. It's either a demonic trick or it's the shroud of Jesus, one of the two. So, and the only reason it would be a trick would be as if we all believed that's what Jesus looked like, and maybe that's what the Antichrist looks like. That's just pure speculation. I've heard people say that, though. But yeah, in my opinion, it's not man-made. That's one thing we can say for sure. Okay, question. The beast that was and is not and is the eighth, but is part of the seven. In what respect is it part of the seven, and any of the seven empires in particular? What is the relationship to the seven? That's a good question. I'm thinking, and we could go back and look at this, I'm thinking the 7 are all the way up. Well, it gets up to, no matter how you do the first 5, um, we get up to Rome being the one that is. So that Roman Empire. So then the next empire would have to be the 10 nations. So if he's the 8th but is of the 7, I'm thinking it basically means that the 10 nations are there. He takes over the 10 nations in the middle of the tribulation period and just reclassifies everything. Remember, we're told that the harlot Babylonian mystery religion is what he uses, he's friendly with, and he uses it to get up in power. Once he is totally in power, can't be stopped, then he and the 10 nations turn on the harlot system and destroy her. And he sets up his own religious system, as mentioned in Daniel 11. So at that point, if you got a guy that's pro, it looks like he's pro Babylon mystery religion, and gets in power, and now he's anti different religion, and he's attacking the person he said he would help, it looks like a totally different empire. Everything has changed. I think that's what we're talking about there. I could be wrong, but that's my thoughts on that. We need scrolls to tell us. That's what we need. Have studied where the Catholic Church was written concerning the rapture and the millennium. Oh, have I? Okay, yes, the Roman Catholic Church reject the rapture and the millennial teachings, but those rejections serve as proof that Darby did not invent them. Oh, that's a good point. Yeah, we actually have. There's so much evidence among the early church fathers to say that the early church fathers all believed in a premillennial view, not necessarily anything else. But the majority of them, like Irenaeus, Hippolytus, and the others, talked a lot about, and that's where we get the End Times by the Church Fathers book. I quote all their quotes on prophecy. So they make it very clear there's a future tribulation period, a literal antichrist and a kingdom, and a pre-tribulational rapture. And then they give other details, which may or may not be accurate, but pretty interesting. And that's the kind of stuff we want to use too. It's like if somebody is arguing about it, it couldn't be invented, whether it's right or wrong, it couldn't be invented years afterwards, or they wouldn't be arguing about it. So those are internal evidences to try to put those together. That's a really good point. Do you think Elon Musk plays a big part in the end times? As Trump has him on his team, he may be the creator of the mark or the image of the beast. The only thing that scares me about him is or that kind of idea is what they call it, the neural link. The idea of, having a hole in a little thing so that they could control the muscles and the brain and stuff like that. And on a good sense, what they're trying to do is if there are nerves that don't work, this thing could kind of take them over or do some other kind of nervous system. And maybe people that can't see or can't walk or whatever will be able to do that, especially somebody that can't walk, to be able to use those nerves that have been severed a different way. Things like that. That sounds fantastic. We just have to be really careful of that technology. If it sounds, it would be one thing to make some sort of wire connection, so to speak, between the brain, the tip of a nerve here and the tip of the nerve down here, like I broke my neck. So some sort of artificial nerve. That would be really easy, other than controlling your mind per se. But we're headed toward a time when we're told that there is a mark of the beast, and we just need to be careful with that. Happens in the middle of the tribulation period, but at the same time, we need to resist any technology going that way. Like the scrolls talk about, we're supposed to also resist any Nephilim medicine, even though it seems like it might be good and might cure things. We don't want to go down that road. No genetic tampering, because it only ends to be evil. And according to that, it does come back toward the end of the age of grace. So it's something that we are beginning to see now. Other than that, he seems like the greatest guy ever. I mean, he the Starlink so that everyone can have access, the whole idea of being free speech. Of course, again, you could be saying that to get in power and then flip. People do. I've never met the guy, so I don't know anything about him personally. We just have to look at that. If Trump can do what he says he's going to do, the United States will get much, much better. And so we'll see what happens. Some of the people are saying, well, that can't be because it has to get worse. But it could get a lot better, and then it could be bad or good, either one, the best or the worst or anywhere in between. And then when the rapture happens, though, especially if it's a pre-trib rapture, all of the Christians are gone, which no matter how small we are, it's going to create some sort of chaos in the government. So at that point, the only people to fill the government would be non-Christians. So everything is going to get very wicked very quickly just because of the rapture happening. So with that in mind, and since it says in 2 Thessalonians that we're supposed to be the restrainer, we're supposed to be the ones that resist. We need to do everything we can to do that. And that's why I'm letting you guys know about Windows and recall and Linux and things like that. Those are little side things we can do to be a little more private, you know. But the main thing we want to do is talk to our representatives and make sure that there's things in place where you can't use that kind of technology to spy on you. We don't want facial recognition everywhere. We don't want people doing backwards reverse warrants and stuff like that. It's just a dangerous road to go down. So yeah, it's something to look at. The technology's there. The other thing that he's doing is, of course, eventually the self-driving cars, and supposedly next year we're going to see the Optimus, I think it is Optimus 3, the Android robot type people, not the phone, but the Android, the robots, at least being leased in places where they have to pick up heavy objects and it's dangerous, like making cars, things like that. Instead of just a robotic arm run by a person, it could be a robot actually doing the job. So those are supposed to be tested, and eventually he wants, well, like he said, 2 in every household. I remember way back when there was, I don't remember which one it was, but in the 50s, I think it was, one of the presidents says, elect me and I will make sure that there's 2 cars in every garage. And everybody's like, nobody can afford 2 cars. What are you, nuts? You know? But prices drop and technology changes, and now you would be hard pressed to find a family where mom doesn't have her car and dad has his car, and sometimes the kids, as they go off to high school and college, you might have 3 or 4 or 5 cars. So that's not super, you know. And then as these things go, if they last, there will be used ones, like everything else, used cars, used robots. So the whole idea that you could have a robot to help teach you a foreign language, teach your kids math, things like that, do the grocery, not necessarily the shopping, but I guess it could order it online, you know, have it delivered, cook it, clean up. If you have a business and you could teach it to do half of what you do, you would have free labor, so to speak. I mean, free in a sense, because you're going to have, maybe that thing's, you know, $50,000, but are you paying an employee $50,000 to do it? So, and that's per year, and this is a one-time shot. So long range, the robots are going to be much cheaper. So everything is changing in the next 2 or 3 years. And what I think is amazing, all this stuff is happening now. If you've thought about it, according to the Dead Sea Scroll calendar, 2025, March, of course, when it starts, is the year of Jubilee, the last year of a Jubilee cycle, which is the next to the last Jubilee. And that's when Trump is coming in, supposedly going to cut the taxes and fix the spending, put things back where they should be. The first year of his office is going to be a Jubilee year, according to the Dead Sea Scroll calendar. Again, that's just really, really interesting. And then we begin the next year, we begin the very last Jubilee, or the last generation, as it's called. So it's fascinating to see those things coming out now. like when the one person asked, it doesn't seem like we have 40 more years left. We may not, but the fact that those things are coming out just on the right times, I think is fascinating. Any prophecies tied to the current situation in Syria? Eventually, Damascus gets destroyed. That's Isaiah 17. The prophecies talk about Israel taking and keeping southern Lebanon. Obadiah says the border would be at a place called Zarephath, where Elijah healed the widow's son. That's called Seraphon now, and it's right by the Litani River. And currently, the peace talks are talking about Hezbollah can't go south of the Litani River, and somebody needs to mount it and watch it. So that theoretically will be the new border of Israel when they get done with this stuff. May not be this time, and they're talking back and forth about someone else running it and them taking it and giving it back. They're just all sorts of things. But ultimately, according to Obadiah, that's what happens. They take and hold the Gaza Strip and the coastline from the Brook of Egypt all the way up to Zarephath. And then the Negev is populated. The tribe of Benjamin comes back and colonizes. There are more Jewish people in southern Lebanon than anywhere else. I mean, it gets very, very populated. So there's a lot of interesting prophecies about that. I'm just hoping that when Trump gets in, he says, we recognize all of Israel to be Israel. Go dig. And I hope we get more scrolls. I'm sure we will. It's going to be an interesting 4 years. Okay, I saw the Testaments of Solomon, and people say it is witchcraft in it. So they found an amulet in Turkey about it. Is it real? Why would God allow it? Was King Solomon saved? Yeah, there are medieval texts called grimoires that teach sorcery, and it's probably all fictitious, but the uh, the talismans and amulets and things like that, and they say it goes back to King Solomon, who had power to work with demons and stuff like that. So those are legends, and I don't think those go back anywhere further than the Middle Ages. However, some of the same type of talismans were found in, remember when Paul went and did a revival, and it was in the city of Ephesus where Diana was at, and they had a big revival, and they came and burned all the occultic books, and the sum was like several thousand gold pieces, that they just burned them all. Some of those texts have been discovered through archaeology, and the same concept of talismans and amulets and those things, very, very similar, were found in those. So the concept of magic and talismans and things like that go way, way back. But there's no evidence that Solomon actually did anything like that. So yeah, that's the keys of Solomon, I think, is what I'm thinking of. There are the Psalms of Solomon. I just went through and did a translation of those. Those are pretty cool. We're told in the Psalms, literally, that David wrote so many, and Solomon rather wrote so many. And there's a lot more than what we have. So we know from the Bible that there are more out there. May or may not be prophetic. The 18th Psalm of Solomon seems to be about the Messiah and the second coming and that kind of stuff. So it's kind of fascinating. So I don't think it was real in the sense that King Solomon had anything to do with it. Do you know where God tells Gog that he has something against him? That's Ezekiel chapter 38 and 39. We look in the far past to why, but could it be that Russia, KGB are the ones that organized Hamas? Possibly. The only thing we know from that passage is that it's the land of Magog, which is southern Russia, where the attack originates from. So that has to be Russia at a certain point wanting to attack Israel. And they don't seem to want to that much at the moment. Plus the fact they're right in the middle of a major war. I'm more interested in exactly what Russia does with Europe, because there are some prophecies in the Ezra apocalypse about Russia and Europe before the Magog attack occurs. So again, this may fizzle out and be fine for a few more years, but one of these skirmishes ends up being a disaster. That's a good question. I don't know that they did organize Hamas or not. The prophecies in Obadiah and in Amos chapter 6 just mentioned that there would be a government seat in Gath of the Philistines that calls itself Hamas. And looking at the way the Dead Sea Scrolls teach us how to find out which Ona it's in, it has to be in this time period. It's not like 500 or 1,000 years ago. So the 10 nations are likely form at the beginning of the tribulation, after the rapture, because they only there for 7 years. Yeah, most likely they because the Antichrist tries to take them over, uses the harlot system to do it, doesn't get complete control of everything till the middle of the tribulation period. So that's the last 3.5 years. It's possible the 10 nations form, but they just don't get along and can't do anything, which is what's predicted. They don't get along with each other. And much like an extreme democracy, where you have to have 100% vote, and there's like, say, 20 different people, you're never going to have a 100% vote. And so in some cases, you just keep going and going and going, and you never get anywhere. It's like the peace accords. There's been, I think, 7 different attempts, major attempts, to force peace between Palestinians and Jews. And they're all written out. It's just nobody will enforce them. And so the Antichrist comes along and enforces them. So yeah, somewhere along those lines. So we're looking at the end of the Roman Empire, which could be 1945 with World War II, or it's simply going to revive one more time, which means it's not over yet. And the way I'm looking at it, I think it's more that than the other. But we'll see what happens. That's one reason why I want to finish up with Daniel, and I want to go into the Ezra Apocalypse and look at this 7th vision of Daniel, assuming they're somewhat correct, or we can pull out the pieces that have been verifiable with history and then see where it goes from there. I think it'll be really, really good. And then hopefully in this next 4 years, we get real copies of those things from the Dead Sea Scrolls, so we know what nothing's been tampered with. Will you ever do a study on the Scroll of Mysteries? There's so many things to study, it takes more than a lifetime. Yeah, if you're talking about the Scroll of Mysteries, which is the Koshin version of Revelation, I just about have that translated. I'm doing my own translation of it. And yeah, we will at least do, maybe not a verse by verse of the entire thing, but there are some different pieces in it that I think are very, very much worth looking at, because they're just different enough to give you a slight different twist on what you're thinking it's meaning. Nothing directly wrong or different, but the nuances in the language. So yes, I plan on doing that. Gifted 5 memberships, Level Angel. Thank you very much. Appreciate you guys doing that. Everybody can actually ask questions, and it makes it a lot more fun. Could Daniel have written the sealed book with a secret script and then buried it somewhere? It's a possibility. We found secret script type stuff in the Dead Sea Scrolls. Took them a long time to decipher it. They turned out being keys to the calendar. I'm not sure why that was such a big secret, but that's what it was. But yes, it's happened before. So very well could be. The only thing I have that is either part of that or part of another piece of Daniel is from that Aramaic copy that says that you saw this vision about the shooting stars, and that represents the 10 nations during that 7-year period. That alone is fascinating. No new direct information, but that changes some stuff. just to know that, hey, there's something else out there. And I don't think it's the seventh vision of Daniel. I have to go look and see if there's anything about shooting stars. And I don't think there is, which means that's talking about yet something else. So be very interesting. Are there suggestions or prophecies in the Dead Sea Scrolls for 2025? Yes, some suggestions. They basically talk about some prophecies can occur anytime. It's just the Lord telling you what happens somewhere, sometime. But they said that most of the prophecies happen during the turn of the ages, sometimes during the turn of the Jubilees. So 2025 is the last year, it's the Jubilee year for the year right before. Let me bring that up here real quick just to show you. So in our ONA studies here, if we go to 12, so this is the one from 1576 to 2075. That is a 500-year ONA period, which is Jubilees 110 to 120. So in here, if we go down here, you can see that 2025, you can see it right here, is the Jubilee year. It's the Jubilee year for Jubilee cycle number. Oh, let me take that question thing off. Just do that real quick. Okay, so let me say that again. So right here, it's 2025. Let's see if I can make that a little bigger. There we go. So this is the end of the age. The end of the age of grace ends. And this is 2025, so that's the 9th Jubilee. It's the Jubilee year of the 9th Jubilee cycle, the 9th set of 50 years. They go by 10 and then they start over. So, and in this case, in 59-51, which would be 2026, Trump's second year, that's when the last 50-year period starts. And this is called in the scrolls the last period, the last generation, or the last Jubilee. They tend to use those interchangeably. And that got me thinking, because a lot of people say, well, when did the budding of the fig tree start? Because it says the generation that sees the budding of the fig tree won't pass until all is fulfilled. Well, if it was 1948 or even 1967, that's kind of, one of those things. Well, the thing is, and I think the way that they're kind of leaning, and it makes sense to me, is Israel was replanted in 1948 and began to grow and took back the Temple Mount in 1967. So if you're thinking about a tree, it has to mature, quit growing, fully grown, and then produce fruit, and then drop the fruit. The fruit, if left alone, would multiply to other trees. And so it's just a growth process. So if Israel expands to the point that it takes over the area of all its enemies, that would be fruit. So you're taking over, other territories, so to speak, not just the first planting and the small growth. So when we look at that, and we didn't talk about it tonight, but we will in this weekend, when you look at the prophecy of the 7-year prophecy from the scrolls, it looks like that's going to happen in 2026, maybe 2027, but the first year, the second year of that last Jubilee period. So if it does, the expansion part, that would be the budding of the fig tree, not the planting or the coming alive and growing the leaves, but the actual budding of the fig tree. And a fig tree, of course, means that Israel at this point is still in unbelief about Messiah. So Israel as a nation is not messianic yet, even through 26 and 27. So it really makes sense. And if that's the case, if it's any time after 2026, as you can see, it's that generation or that Jubilee cycle will not pass until everything is fulfilled. So, and that might mean it's up here, it might mean it's back here also, but all of the prophecies that we're talking about. So it's really, really interesting to look at. As the prophetic meaning of the baskets through Joseph in Egypt in his days, okay, and days can also mean a period of time. Does that change the passage about the women in the basket covered by a lead lid? I'd have to think about it. I don't think those two have anything to go together other than the fact that there's baskets. So there's 3 baskets, and he said 3 days, and then he'll be released and the other guy's killed. There's nothing about 3 or a number necessarily. There are 2 stork women that take the woman in the basket to Shinar or Babylon. I don't know, it'd be something interesting to look at. I don't think they would be connected, but it's worth looking at. Anything like that's worth looking at. What is the Scroll of Mysteries? I've never heard of it. It's a Hebrew, probably 1st century, Hebrew copy of Revelation that is done. That's just, our Revelation talks about it's the revelation of Jesus Christ. In Hebrew, it says it's the mysteries of Yeshua the Messiah. So it's just a slight difference in the translation. But that's what we're talking about. It's a group of Jews in Cochin in India are the ones that have had a lot of scrolls that we would like to look at. See if I go back here to the bookstore. Gad the seer is one of the missing 5. There was Gad, Nathan, Ahijah, Shemaiah, and Iddo that all wrote prophecy books. We managed to get a hold of Gad and publish it. I've got some fragments of Nathan, and I'd like to get the others, but they're in possession. The only people that probably still have them are the Koshin Jews. These guys also have, they write things in their own script. It's Hebrew, but it's really an interesting script. But they have the Scroll of Mysteries, which is a Revelation version. People always wonder, why would they have it? Well, somewhere along the line, persecutions happen, and you're forced to convert to Roman Catholicism. Sometimes, if you give a good excuse and say, I just don't believe it because of some other scroll, and I don't want to do something I don't believe, I don't care what you do, I'm not going to cause problems, but I just don't believe it. And if they think you're telling the truth, then they just let you go because you're no harm to them. Don't even want to talk about it, not really religious, I'm secular, leave me alone. And so a lot of the Jews pulled together Hebrew versions of the New Testament that might be slightly different, or to say, well, in Hebrew, it can mean that, what you're saying, but it could also mean this. And if it meant that, then that's why I don't believe any of this stuff. And it was used for people to try to go to court and not convert, not do a forced conversion. But anyway, that's what it is. I have what I want to do also. I have a copy of the translation that I did. I've finished it, of Jude and of James from the Hebrew, from the Kochni area. And then the Book of Mysteries is Revelation. So it'd be interesting. It's rumored that almost all the New Testament exists. So I would love to get those and look at them. And hopefully we'll be able to take them and do a base translation and put them on our scroll page so you guys can just listen to them. So that'll be good too. Are there any specific prophecies about Europe or the UK in this last Jubilee? Basically, the only ones that I know of would be like in Ezekiel 38, when Russia attacks. It talks about the merchants of Tarshish, which would be Britain, and the young cubs of Tarshish. And a lot of us don't look at the wording in Hebrew just right. We think of it as cubs being all the different nations that came from England. And and you can translate it that way, but it has the connotation to it that it's a group of cubs. So if the only group of cubs that formed from Great Britain would be the 13 colonies. And so that's a way of saying England and America. So England and America are still alive. They're not nuked, but they talk to Russia and say, have you come to take a spoil? Like, you shouldn't. And that doesn't necessarily mean they're not going to get involved, but they don't get involved very quickly, or maybe they just don't get involved at all. They don't want to. If the rapture's already happened and the only people over here are people that want to be by themselves, not be bothered by fighting, I could see that being a thing. But in either case, the United States and Great Britain are not nuked, or not destroyed, so to speak. And we get the idea that Tarshish is Britain from, I think it's Isaiah 60 or 61. It actually defines it for us. I remembered to hit the like. Make sure you do. Yes, thank you. Yeah, hit the like button if you like this kind of content and the stuff, and then subscribe. It helps us grow up in the ranks, and we get more people watching, which generates a little more income, which means we can do more. So, anyway, thank you very much. Appreciate that. Was there an apostle that could have carried scrolls to India, thereby it ended up in Cochin? It's possible. Yeah, actually, that's another, would be a whole other direction. But the group of that originally went to Cochin, they were a group of Jews that were total believers in Israel. Remember when Israel and Judah split, and then the Assyrians came down and took 2 tribes, then they came down and took 2 more tribes, and then they came down and took everybody. And it was in 3 waves. So there was a group of Jews in Israel, the Israel part, not Judah, that realized the prophecy said within a couple of generations, this whole thing is going to be taken. So we can either sit here and go into slavery, or we could just pick up and leave. If we do it now, we can walk out and nobody will bother us. So they picked up and they went to Yemen, and they were there for centuries. And then until Islam came and Yemen got too dangerous, and they picked up and they went to India. And they've been in that area since that time, whenever it was they moved. But they didn't even have a complete Old Testament canon, because they never saw, Isaiah and all those guys. So they didn't have any of that. But they did have Gad, Ahijah, Shemaiah, and Iddo, and Nathan. So that's why we were trying to get those things. But then later on with the other persecutions, that whole idea of we need some New Testament documents, old ones, that might hopefully say it a different way, where you could say, well, it could mean this also. So that's why I don't want to be a Christian or Catholic or something. And that's why they were kept. So thank the Lord they were kept. But yeah, that could have actually happened too. It's hard telling, but possible. Oh, there's another one there. Okay, we'll go ahead and stop there for tonight. And let me check the other part here. We won't be here. Okay, yeah, we won't be here next Monday, because we'll just be coming back from the conference. So go back down to here to our public calendar. So yeah, so the conference is the 5th to the 8th. So we've canceled next week's Monday night study. We will have it on the following Monday, which is the 16th. And then we'll cancel the next 2 because of Christmas and New Year's. And then next year we'll start fresh, and hopefully be able to, I would like to try to do 2 broadcasts per week. We'll see how it goes anyway. I'm trying to get all these little translations done so we can start studying like the Scroll of Mysteries and the history of Azazel and Shemyaza and some of those others. Be really fascinating, because you guys will see things that I don't see, and between the 2 of us, we can figure a lot of stuff out. So, okay, we'll go ahead and say good night, and we will see you not next week, but in 2 weeks. And if I can, I'll try to do a quick hi and show you stuff from the conference. I'll try to do that too. So anyway, I just pray that we have a safe trip forward and back, and that everything go really well. Thank you guys, and we'll see you in 2 weeks.